Hi everyone and welcome back to The Urban Aesthetic. In today's video, I'm going to respond and share my thoughts on a comment made by Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong about lying flat. I will summarize the context of the comment that he made. I'll define what exactly lying flat means, including its nuances, before sharing my thoughts. Now on to the context. So I think this was at a forum where he was posed a question as to how should young Singaporeans define success today and what kind of mindset should they have moving forward. And he gave a historical governmental perspective. He shared about how Singapore has progressed since the past, that a large number of the population is educated today and has a lot more opportunities than before. And he said that the world is sort of your oyster. He shared about Singaporeans who were doing innovative and interesting works in different parts of the world, Rwanda, Silicon Valley, so on and so forth. And then he admonished or encouraged us, do not lie flat. And that if you do lie flat, I hope that after a while, you'll be ashamed of yourself. And he finished by saying that, show us, right? We've done all of this for you. Go forth and show us that you're better than us. Right, so that sort of summarizes the comment. And before I proceed, I want to sort of highlight a very interesting point about the nature of Asian communal shame as well as honor. Right, so in Lee Hsien Loong, in Senior Minister Lee's comment, he mentioned how we should be ashamed of ourselves if we choose to lie flat after a while. Right, and this appealed to communal sense of shame. And he did the same thing when he said, go forth and show us that you're better than us. Right? Not to place a judgment on that comment, but it's just interesting how the Asian dynamic of honor and shame comes into play in his comment. Now, having said that, if you are listening to his comment, you might feel, okay, that doesn't really apply to me. If I'm really tired, I'm not really going to care, and I want to lie flat, I'm not really going to care what you think, right? But in another sense, it sort of weighs on you because he's made this comment and it's sort of, I don't know, in a maybe a not that arbitrary sense, the older generation's perspective of what it means to live a life well is sort of weighing down on us, right? And I get that that's quite a real concern for many people. Right, now, moving on to this definition of lying flat. So I'm going to categorize it into three parts, A, B, and C. Okay, A, I would say, is sort of the typical Singaporean prescriptive definition of success, which is to get good grades, get into university, get a good degree, find a good job, and so on and so forth. That very traditional prescriptive sense of what it means to be successful in a Singaporean or even an Asian notion, right? So that is option A. Now, option B would be lying flat, but I think when I look at the definition of lying flat, it specifically means a rejection of option A, and it comes with this connotation of a posture of, I just want to chill. I just want to be content. I want to do whatever I want to do. Right? And lying flat, it sort of originates from the Chinese phenomenon in 2021 at the height of COVID called Tang Ping. And it's also closely associated to the modern phenomenon of quiet quitting, which is just doing the bare minimum at work and trying not to get out, not striving for more. Right? And I think option B in this sense is sort of, I think, where many people land in. But then there's option C, right? So option C is still lying flat, but I think with a sense of resignation or a tinge of giving up, right? And I think this group of people are basically looking at this rat race and say, forget it. I just want to chill, man. I just want to do whatever I want. And I don't care what you think. I'm just going to live for myself primarily, right? And so there's this sense of whatever. Right, resignation I think is the appropriate word. Giving up is a little bit too strong. And it is quite distinct from option B, because option B is more about contentment and the rejection of option A. Now, I think the rejection of option A, there's good merit and value to that option. Increasingly, Singaporeans and people across all developed countries are getting quite tired of this whole rat race thing, and they are beginning to question what it means to live a life well. And beyond a certain salary or financial amount, the the additional benefit that you get from having higher salary or more money diminishes greatly. And so I can sort of relate, we can understand why that might be the case, and people are therefore moving to option B. There are also verses from the Bible which support this notion of option B, especially the contentment part of it. Right? So for example, godliness with contentment is great gain. Right? And here we are talking specifically about gratitude. Right? I am grateful for what I have, and I'm content with what I have. I don't strive or continually seek more of these things that I may never get and will make me increasingly unhappy. Right? And that's a good thing. Now, option C, on the other hand, typically refers to people who are quite tired and they sort of maybe resigned to certain aspects of their life that maybe they can't change, and they certainly don't want this whole prescriptive notion of success imposed on them. And to this group of people, I think SM Lee's comment might actually come across as offensive in a certain way, but I have great sympathy for this group of people. Right? If you are tired, right, you certainly should take care of not just yourself, but care for your soul as well, which is a topic that I'm going to cover in other videos. And when you have sort of recovered and find yourself in a better place, I would say, ask yourself precisely, what is it that you want? And that's another video that I'm going to put forth quite soon. So look out for that one. Right? And having said that, right, having spoken to the people who might feel or they're veering off into option C, I want to sort of share my thoughts on SM Lee's comment directly. Right? So SM Lee is really coming from a government nation building perspective, right? And understandably so. His father has invested his whole life into building Singapore, and he has followed suit, and he's at the tail end of that journey right now. Right? And so understandably, if he's poured all of this for the younger generation, and they're going to tell him that, no, I just want a life flat, you can see immediately how offensive that can be to him, and how ridiculous it is in the light of what so many of our older generation have gone forth and sacrificed for. Right? And so I have great sympathy for SM Lee's comment, right? Even though I feel that it may not exactly speak to the person who's really worn out today. Now, largely, I'm actually in agreement with him, except that he comes from a more governmental perspective, whereas I come from a more global citizen perspective. So let me explain. Think of it this way. There's a verse in the Bible that says, to whom much is given, much will be required. Right? And before you accuse me of just trying to guilt trip you, there's a much simpler way to think through that verse, which is a line that we are all very familiar with. With great power comes great responsibility. Right? And that's something I think most of us would readily agree with. Now think of it from an inspirational figure perspective, right? There's someone like Bill Gates, with the way that he's used his wealth and the philanthropic work he has done, and how he's researching and finding ways to get the cure for malaria readily available in some of the poorest countries around the world, where people still die from the disease, even though there's a simple cure for it. Will someone like him inspire us? Is that a picture of a life well lived, or is it closer to lying flat? Right? Think of other figures. Right? When you think of Elon Musk, what is your gut reaction that comes to mind? What about someone like Donald Trump? Now, immediately you can get a sense, right, just by how you feel about these people, even if you don't know them well. Right? The latter two being slightly more controversial than the former. Right? And with that, you can get a picture of why Senior Minister Lee might be saying something like, do not lie flat, specifically to Singaporeans. Right? There's another way to think of it, which is that why is it the case that I was born in Singapore rather than in a third world poor country in another part of the world? Now that's a question that none of us will ever have an answer to. Right? Whether you believe in God or you're an atheist and you believe in the divine roll of the dice. But safe to say that it should put us in a position of deep gratitude and deep concern or responsibility for the people around us. Think of it this way, if I have parents, if I was born in a third world country and my parents were poor, and for some reason I managed to make it to Singapore, get a well-paying job, where would my resources and my money go? It's quite clear, isn't it? The Bible has a verse where it talks about loving your neighbor. And the question is, who today is our neighbor? Now, in traditional times, it is quite fair to say that your neighbor is simply the people immediately or physically around you. And in other parts of the world, you have no understanding, no knowledge, and therefore you kind of have no responsibility over them. But that is quite different today. With a few clicks of the button, we actually know what's going on in all these poor countries, or we know a glimpse at least. And supporting them is easier than ever. Right? I give $45 to World Vision, which helps a boy and his community in Africa. They have a 15-year plan to improve the lives of the people within the entire community. And that's a very basic, simple way to be to care and have that concern to love your neighbor, even if you may never even get to meet him in this life. Right? And so it is in that vein that I would invite you not to lie flat. A friend of mine actually posted on Instagram and asked, is it really a cardinal sin to want to lie flat? And I kind of understand where he's coming from. And I wouldn't say pronounce a judgment on whether you decide to lie flat, but I would say that it's a great tragedy if we in Singapore or any other developed country for that matter, out of all the options available to us, actually choose to lie flat. In the sense of option C, right? Not necessarily option B. Right? So if you're tired today, if you're worn out by this endless, in some senses, meaningless rat race that Singapore, as well as most of the developed world, has imposed on us through culture, I invite you first to rest, to take care of yourself. But once you're in a better place, to maybe figure out what is it that you want. Right? And for that, you can watch my other video, where I work through this idea of what is it that we want that most of us actually haven't really worked through. Right? We're sort of drifting along or following culture. And once we have done that, right, maybe we can have a vision that is a bit larger than just us and our family. The reality on the ground is that many, many people are very, very kind relationally to their friends and families, but they actually have little or no concern for the broader needs of the world around them, despite having some of the best resources globally to go and fulfill that need. And so I thank you for listening. If you enjoyed my video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on The Urban Aesthetic.